Nobody's blowing up my phone like, where are you guys?
All right. This meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Okay.
Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay. Are live. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So, hi, everybody. We were having a little technical problem on Facebook and Zoom. So, we're switching to YouTube and Zoom to give it a try. So, I am here with Sam Greenberg. And she is our Enneagram Sexpert, as she calls herself. And so I wanted to share to the group all of the different ways that the Enneagram can be used in a clinical setting. And I'm going to have Sam introduce herself, and we're going to have a conversation about the Enneagram and sexuality. Sam, do you want to give the group some of your background?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Sam E. Greenberg. I'm a professional researcher and an Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality and relationships. And I'm currently conducting my doctoral research on the Enneagram and sexuality, specifically on sexual desire and how type impacts sexual desire. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the study and more about the Enneagram and sex in general, maybe how you can apply that clinically. And I'm super excited to be here with Mysti, rowing our way through technical difficulties and everything.
Thank you, Sam. So tell the group a little bit too about what school do you go to and what specifically are you looking for in the study? And I believe you're also looking still for participants to do some of your assessments, correct?
Very much so. Absolutely. So I'm doing my doctorate in psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And what the study is looking at is, like I said, the relationship between type and sexual desire. And I'm looking at that in two ways, in like a survey, quantitative way, also in interviews. And I'm shooting to have a really large sample so that there can be closer to statistical certainty about the results, which means I'm recruiting, as Mysti said, for participants, hugely. I have about half of the number that I need right now, but anyone who knows their type, which I assume everyone in this group probably does, is basically eligible as long as you know the Enneagram pretty well and you know your type. You can participate, and we'll put the link. We'll post the link where you can go to be in the study. It's just a 10 to 15 minute fully anonymous survey. And then if you are feeling brave and you want to do an interview with me, you can sign up for that at the end of the survey, but it's fully optional. If you just happen to be a type 3, you guys are having a really hard time some reason with 3s, and I do need roughly equal numbers of each type. So if you're a 3, do me extra solid and be in the study. And hopefully the results will, tell us a lot more than we know now about how our types, interact with our sexual selves, which I think is really important clinically, especially for sex therapists and relationship based therapists, but probably for all kinds of therapists.
Mm-hmm. So the audience in the group right now, Sam, we have a variety of levels of Enneagram knowledge in the group. So some people have heard of it and they are interested in learning more and possibly introducing it to a clinical setting. Others are sort of moderately familiar. And then we do have some people in the group who are also certified Enneagram teachers. And why don't you share with the group a little bit about that in regard to I think more and more people are discovering now that, like everything in life, the Enneagram can be viewed through different lenses. And I am certified through Dr. Jerome Wagner's Enneagram Spectrum certification. What is your certification?
I did my Enneagram coaching training with the narrative Enneagram. They have a whole, multi step process for that. So that's sort of my background, but I also did independently study the Enneagram for about 13 years before I even did any formal training. And there are different schools of thought. And so depending on who you came up with and did your trainings with, you have like a little bit of a different perspective on the Enneagram. And that's great. That's helpful for us all to have different perspectives. So I'm excited for folks in your group to be exploring its use.
Got it. Yeah, so hopefully this will be good information. And then for all of you watching, you can contact either Sam or me or any certified Enneagram teacher if you are unsure of your type or you're sort of vacillating back and forth between, 2 or 3 different types. Definitely going through some multi-steps. We have a combination of online assessments that can be used, and there's a few really good ones out there. There's a few really bad ones out there as well. And then the second recommendation that I give to people is to use the paragraph test. That's another sort of a nice secondary way to type yourself. And then the third step that I highly recommend, especially for any of us licensed clinicians who are wanting to use the Enneagram in our clinical setting, I think that it's really important to work with someone and actually do typing interviews before you decide that you definitively do know your type, or to help you decide if you're going back and forth between 2 or 3. So the reason that I wanted Sam to join us today is that this is just another aspect, like the work, Sam, that you're doing right now. And I think you and a few other people are really bringing this into light with research, because one of the reasons I started this group is that for those of us who are licensed clinicians, we tend to lean heavily on assessments and therapeutic modalities and techniques that are evidence-based. And sometimes the Enneagram gets critiqued by this particular group for not being as heavily evidence-based as some of the other modalities that we use. But in my opinion, and that's why I love the work that you're doing, and the fact that this is entering into other universities and getting research, not just with sexuality, but with other areas as well, so that we can break through that. Because every modality that that this heavily evidence-based modalities that we use now started somewhere before they were evidence-based. And yes. And so I'm trying to really get that word out. And I can't imagine doing clinical work without personality. I think I've mentioned that I'm also Myers-Briggs certified and DISC certified. And I'm a huge fan of personality work in general. I think it can be helpful for all of us. And then when I was sort of reintroduced to the Enneagram about 10 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I haven't been using this the whole time. And it's the most amazing clinical tool that I have my hands on these days. So in regard to type, let's start with our types. What is your type on the Enneagram, Sam?
I'm a type 5. I'd also like to say something real quick in response to what you just mentioned about research, because I have very strong opinions about that. As a type 5 investigator, there is a dearth of research on the Enneagram, for sure. That is true. But a lot of the tools that psychologists think have more evidence behind them, for example, the Myers-Briggs, in fact, do not have robust evidence as much as people think. So we also have this huge issue with what's called face validity, which is where people find the Enneagram to just be true. Like it feels true to people. And that's enormously the case with the Enneagram. Like people really resonate with it. So that should be taken into consideration. And then of course, like using the fact that there's not research as a reason not to do research is so silly. So it is like a little bit of a difficult area to do one's work in, because, people want to say, well, it doesn't have enough research, but that's the reason that I'm doing research. So I totally second everything you said about that. So back to our type. So yes, I'm a type 5. If you don't know too much about what that is, that's it's often considered to be like the heady, bookish, like intellectual type, a thinking type, quite disconnected from the body often, very insular, like internalized, not so, the reputation is not so emotionally intelligent necessarily, kind of a loner. I don't know what else I can say about fives right now.
Well, what I love is that, so I love several of the things that you just said, and it's so nice that this is really organic. We're just having a conversation about it so that clinicians in the group can get a sense of, what's happening out there, some history, some research. I think that how you described the type 5 is such a perfect fit for what you're doing. You're researching, right? So I am a type 8 and a female type 8, which is always interesting and unique because it's a very sort of a masculine personality set. And so for women who are type 8s, just what you were saying about like it being a really good fit, I absolutely identified with that because when I look at some of the other personality profiling tools that I've used, a little bit of that comes up, but not nearly as much as it did when I was introduced to the Enneagram when I was young. And I remember thinking, oh, I thought he was a little more spiritual than I was comfortable with. And I'm a pretty data oriented person as well. And so I went some other routes. And then when I was reintroduced to it, that's when I really got that sense that you're talking about, like this fits like a glove, how there's so many elements and aspects that really align for me, both in the gifts and in the sins, or in the strengths and the weaknesses, whatever language we want to use. And so the type 8, for those of you watching, is the leader, boss, challenger. And it's interesting because my experience has been exactly that. I've often been in roles where I was leading or where I was the boss. I'm self-employed now. And I think anybody who knows me personally would definitely call me a challenger, not always positively, not always as a compliment. And so that's a big part of why it was such a good fit for me, is I thought, oh my gosh, when I really started looking at the dark side of the Enneagram 8 and understanding that there's some masculinity in there in a social context, it was so helpful for me to make some desired changes in my life that were appropriate. So, and then, so in regard to pairing the two, the Enneagram and sexuality, how did you get interested in that? Like from a 5 perspective, wanting, to research it, how did you partner this in your studies?
That's a great question. So I'll start with like how I got interested in it in general, which is basically that I have like a sexuality background. I've taught sex ed. I studied public policy, but like a public health lens, where, I looked at sex education policy in the US and things like that. I've always been a big advocate for reproductive rights, stuff like that. So that was a big, huge passion area of mine. And then the Enneagram on its own was a big, huge passion area of mine. And when I wanted to go, back to school and do a doctorate, I was trying to think about what to do. And it's, what do you never get tired of talking about? What are you endlessly interested in? And it's like the Enneagram and sex. So it seemed like a natural place to explore. And then when I looked into it, there was virtually nothing done on it at the time that I began my schooling. And in fact, there's, very little has been done on it. There's a couple of studies that I can talk more in depth about if you want. And then there's me now and some colleagues are doing larger studies now. But up until this point, I mean, there's virtually nothing written about this. There is one book by Ann Gadd, but people aren't talking about this. Which is baffling to me. I think it's so interesting. It's not been studied. So that was like the birth of the idea. And then I went to school and designed a study and started working on it. But I also started doing in my coaching, exploring these things and getting a real sense of how each type does have sexual desire patterns and sexuality patterns that tend to play out pretty similarly for each type, insofar as the person is like acting within their type, acting within their ego structure. So if we want to like pick on me, we can pick on ourselves.
Okay.
Like 5s tend to be like the sexual intellectual, where we are very like in our heads. We're really into fantasies. Like, thinking about sexy things is great, but like feeling embodied sexuality, like in the body, that's much more rare for a 5. And these things play out commonly. I mean, 5s are, probably, as far as I can tell, more likely to be to have a relationship with like pornography or erotica, or just things that they can process through their mind. And if I want to help people, get free of those patterns, which I do therapeutically, then like understanding them better is a great way to do that. And then of course, like 8s are very sexually intense, the sexual energy masters. They, like the intensity, the rawness, like run the sexual energy through my body, find a partner who's equally intense as me, who can match me. But 8s are very often disconnected from their heart space, vulnerability and intimacy when they're acting within their type. So if we want to help 8s get free, we want to help them get into their heart, into their softness, into their innocence more. So that's us picking on ourselves. But I mean, you can see these things in every type. And I think that's so interesting. And again, clinically interesting if you're working with people who are coming in with issues within their sexuality or issues within their relationships related to these things. All the better if we can understand it through type and help people based on that.
I love that. And having never heard your take on a type 8 and sexuality, I can tell you, just as a personal response, everything that you said, I absolutely identify with. I really, lots of sexual energy, lots of sexual intensity. And I'm an 8-wing 7, so I would say also lots of, exploration, desire for exploration, definitely desire for a partner who can even tolerate my sexual level, much less match my sexual intensity and desire for exploration. So that's one of the things we were talking about in regard to when people find the Enneagram, they will often say it's just such an amazing fit. Like how can there be a descriptor that is so like me? Never perfect, right? Because no two individuals, we're like snowflakes or fingerprints. We're all unique, but there are definitely clusters and patterns and of habit. And when we're in our type, you will often see sort of repetition of the same thing. And so when I've spoken to other female 8s, I'm also, we should mention in the group, so there are instincts as well. And I happen to be a sexual 8. What is your instinct, Sam?
I'm a 5 also. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it makes sense too, because you've got 2 individuals who are of different types, but of the same instinct, that are making a video on sex and sexuality.
Yeah.
Now, right. And we're very comfortable and in our element. And I think, both very familiar, with asect and really, wanting to make sure that sex and sexuality becomes a public topic. You would be more likely to find individuals with sexual instinct involved in those causes and those conversations versus the other 2 instincts, which are self-preservation and social. You might not necessarily find folks in those instincts, depending on the other factors that that they're looking at. Maybe if we had a research student who was a social 5, you might find them willing to speak openly about sexuality from a research perspective, but maybe not so willing to disclose personal aspects of sexuality as well. So Let's see. So what is do you have, I know that you're still gathering data in your research, but could you run us around, sort of do a tour of the types at all of some of the things that are popping up in your research?
What I could do is talk you through the patterns types that I've observed and sort of discovered in my early pilot research. The data that I'm collecting now, I've actually resisted going in and analyzing it because I only have about half of my sample size right now. So it wouldn't be I feel like it wouldn't be ethical to the data to draw conclusions when I don't have quite a statistically robust sample yet. So I can't say so much. I can tell you what I'm studying, but I can't say so much what I've found. But I can tell you more about each of the types patterns a little bit, just like I did with 5 and 8, if that's helpful.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah. So type 1s, you see rigidity, you see, the sexual ethicism. Is ethicism a word? It is now. Where, they want it to be right, and right is going to vary completely from person to person, but whatever the one thinks is the right way is the way that they want it done, the way, the only way they think that desire should happen. So you can see, I know a type 1 who is a diehard polyamorist. Is that a word? I don't know. And she really believes like polyamory is the way, the truth. Like everyone who's not doing that is like wrong. So, and then there's other ones who are, church goers who believe that sex should be within marriage. So ones are really like, their desire is within these boundaries, these rigid boundaries of what they consider to be ethical. And yeah, like they can see sex as like right action, or they have to earn it, or, they have to wait until everything is right in order to do it. So that's ones.
Okay.
2s are more the sexual giver or helper, where they are really like, my partner is what's important, partner or partners. Their pleasure is my pleasure. They're very giving. I mean, you could guess this, right?
Yeah.
They often, unlike 9s who don't always know their sexual needs, 2s tend to know their sexual needs, but they're often not speaking up about them. They're just giving, hoping for reciprocity, which, they may or may not receive. They sometimes get caught up with like, sex as a demonstration that the partner loves them. Sex equals love, like I have to have sex with my partner so that they will love me, that kind of stuff. And they really feel a lot of desire when it's like sex that nurtures the relationship or reassures them of their connections. So that's 2s. This is going to be just me talking for a little bit here, but 3s, the sexual achievers, they have, a lot to prove. They want to be the best sex you've ever had. They are really interested also, like 2s, in a partner's pleasure, but not because they want to feel like they're loved or needed, but because they want to feel like they're successful. So the partner's pleasure is like a sign of their success. Sometimes they can actually have, I've mentioned this before, they can actually have like performance anxiety or avoid sex because they put so much pressure on themselves to be like great in bed that it sort of short circuits where they just avoid it because then it's just too much pressure. Sometimes you can see that. They're very charming. We know 3s are very charming. They're great at seducing. They're great at getting partners. And they just want to be great, 4s are much more sex as emotional connection, the romantic, the longing for deep, authentic connection for a partner who really sees them deeply, whether that is a long-term partner or not, fours really often need to feel an emotional connection to feel desire, an emotional or even like a deep spiritual kind of connection. And they're really big into longing and like fantasizing about an ideal partner, which sometimes can take them out of being satisfied with what they actually have in the moment. This is all making sense so far?
Yeah, so it makes sense to me. And I think this is great information. Again, we're, kind of a quick note to the clinicians in the group is that imagine having all of this, like this, a wealth of information about your clients going into the therapeutic environment. And, how often do we talk in the clinical setting about, sex, money, parenting, division of the workload? Sex is one of the biggest, most often talked about topics in the counseling office. And so I think this is amazing information, Sam. So, all right. Are you going to skip over 5 since we already talked about 5?
Yeah, I'll touch on it super quick. I think you're right too. If you know your client's type, I mean, these are all generalizations and stereotypes, and often healthier, very, very healthy people will not fit them. But, probably someone seeking therapy, they fit them. So you do have, quite a bit of information to at least to begin to ask questions about if you know these things. 5, I'll pretty much skip, but they are, like I said, very in the head, and they have a real difficulty embodying. They often have like what they think is a connection in their head with someone else, but it's not happening in the relationship space. So it's like the connection's happening in a fantasy and not reality. And 5s often don't know the difference. So this can be really tricky to break them or us out of. Okay, so 6s. 6s are very reticent. They are very focused on safety, security, and predictability. They want something to rely on and to know what to expect. So they are often turned on by like partner's commitment to their future, a partner's commitment to anything that makes them feel safe. They do like a predictable routine sexually oftentimes. With counterphobic 6s are sometimes a little bit different, a little more open to variety. And so would a 7 wing. But 6s are like, they don't jump into the water with both feet. They walk in a little tiny bit at a time. So they're unlikely to speak up for their needs directly, not because they don't know them, but because they're afraid of rejection. And they do feel often like they don't know if they feel like they want to go for it or not. So they can be like a little hard to read. They can kind of like stop, go. They're definitely, they can be a little bit unimaginative, no offense, 6s, just because they want to feel that predictability and that routine. On the upside, for their partners, they're usually really open to whatever the partner's like kinks and whatever, the partner like. 6s are usually really supportive of whatever, as long as they clearly have been communicated with about it in advance. So they can be like great and really supportive sexual partners. 7s, you kind of touched on with your wing, are like the sexual adventurer. Basically, they are amassing a mountain of experiences about everything in life, including sex. They love variety, love adventure, love novelty, probably will try anything once, even if they're not particularly like sexually interested in it themselves. They're like, this is weird and cool, like I'll just do it. So they can be a lot of fun, to be partnered with, and their desire is more open and tied to novelty. Like they're going to feel desire for experiences that are new and interesting and different, and that sort of like feed their like adrenaline junkiness. 8s we already talked about. Let's see if I want to say anything about 8s. Yeah, I mean, I think you spoke to it. Super intense, super like high energy, the rawness. They can definitely come on very strong. Like if they're interested in you sexually and you're not an 8, you can be almost bowled over by their directness, which I think that's really cool and fun. But yeah, they really are straight shooters, and they're like probably the ones who walk up to you at the bar and are like, hey, you're hot. Like, do you want to have sex with me? And that really works for them a lot of times. I mean, they can be pretty charming. So that's 8. And then 9s, a little bit complex in my opinion. 9s are harder to understand, not because they're very diffuse and very prone to merging and communion with other people and with nature and with God and with the universe. So 9s are really like the sexual priests and priestesses of the Enneagram, wherein they like merge into universal consciousness and stuff during lovemaking. They're really like, the cosmic children of the Enneagram, merging into the infinite and stuff like that, which for the rest of us would be transcendent experience, but for them, that's like an everyday experience. And that's cool. But they can also, when less healthy, just merge completely with the partner to where they've forgotten themselves. Self-forgetting is a big issue for 9s. Will they become identified with the partner's desire equals their desire, or they'll lose touch with whether they have their own desire or not. If they are in touch with their desire is usually like pretty different than other people's. They're often like really tuned into nature, where they can kind of like get turned on by nature, or they can, have less frequent desire, but when they have it, it's really, they always have it in the background, but they're not interested in constantly enacting it. So if you know a 9, or you've had a sexual relationship with a 9, they can be really different than what you're used to and what other people are like. And I think they're the hardest to understand personally for me. But so that's a little bit about all of them. A quick rundown.
Yes, I love it, Sam. Thank you. And so that again is just an example for the clinicians in the group of the kinds of data and information that you can gather when you think that you have someone typed fairly accurately. I am also a huge fan of reminding everyone that the Enneagram is not proprietary, so nobody owns it. And that means that there's some people out there doing wonderful, amazing things with it, like you and I. Or it also means that there are some people out there doing some, I want to assume that, that all people are well-intended, but I'm seeing some of these memes pop up and, different aspects. And I want to remind everyone in this group, especially a group that is, concerned about evidence-based tools in general. So my certifying teacher, Jerry Wagner, he actually is the first published author in the United States on the Enneagram, with his dissertation that he did on the Enneagram in 1980. So, so again, it's really good to know that there are more people researching, and that we will start to see, more evidence-based aspects come out of this. But I always want to clarify, when we're using the Enneagram or anything as a clinical tool, that I don't use this as definitive. So I always try to be really careful in my language. And I think most of us who are really using this seriously, you'll never hear me say like all 5s do this or all 8s do this. Well, first of all, there's so many variations of elements just within the Enneagram that would cause that not to be true. But also we have to take so many other things into consideration. We have to take, socioeconomic status and sexual orientation and gender and life experiences and education levels and all of those different things, age, experience, maturity, those kinds of things will come into play too. But what I love about this is, imagine the benefit for a therapist to have a sense of some of that information that you just shared for us. Especially, I'm thinking, well, in individual work, they could, they could use it to talk about relationships or sexual activities. But I can tell you where I use a lot of this is in couples work, and I do a lot of couples work, is recognizing, how might there come to be conflicts in relationships, not around the sexual practices of someone by type, but the thing that I have discovered most is about the inability to figure out a safe way to talk to your partner about ways that you are similar and ways that you are different sexually. So that I've just seen so many amazing results when I can get couples to say, like if you're having a problem with sex isn't usually the problem. The problem is, are you able to communicate about sex? And do you feel like, like this partner in this relationship is a safe space for you to talk about what do you like, what do you not like? We could pull, some of the things out of each type that you were talking about. If my sexual partner is a type 1, and I recognize that, maybe the way that shows up for my type 1 partner is that they have to have everything perfectly in place, before sex can occur. The bed has to be made perfectly, or the sheets have to be turned down. The pillows have to be fluffed. So I've seen some ones sort of play that aspect of accuracy out in a sexual manner. So if, let's say I'm a type 8 and my partner, who I just want to jump into the bed and throw the covers all over the place. And I could care less if the candle is lit. And you can see that there might be conflict if those two folks are partnered. And the way through that conflict is to learn how to have a conversation about it, so that, maybe I, as a type 8, would be a little less frivolous, but I can, through conversation, help my type 1 partner be a little less perfectionistic, and that we could use that information to start the conversation. So in the therapy office, that's how I always talk about the Enneagram. I don't have to definitively put someone in a type, but what I know is if we can get as accurate as possible with typing, it's a beautiful way to start conversations about many different topics, including sex and sexuality.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Good. All right. Well, let's see. If we were actually live, I was hoping to have questions, but technology was not working for us today. So I think that the next step will be, so we're going to post the link to your assessment and your study in the group when we post this in the group. And then we'll also post your contact information. You are also a member of the group. And so if anybody wants to message Sam, if you have any questions, you could message her on Facebook. Of course, everybody knows that you can post questions here in the group or message me on Facebook as well. If you have any questions about anything Enneagram, anything sex and sexuality. And I was going to mention before too, you had said, you really love the Enneagram and you really love sex and sexuality, so you partnered the two. And it's funny because that's how this group got started. Is I love psychotherapy and psychology, and I love the Enneagram, and so I partnered the two because there didn't seem to be a lot of licensed clinicians who were necessarily using it, and both are my passion. And so for everyone in the group, that's how the group got started. Is it's kind of my goal to share the way that you can marry those two topics, as you can marry the Enneagram with many other topics as well. So,
yeah.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for walking through my technological dysfunction with me today, and just being willing to share what you're doing with the group. And I hope that you have, maybe by sharing it with the group, they will share it with everyone they know, and you'll get all those participants that you need.
Oh, I hope so. I really would appreciate it. Yeah, I think that just briefly, one of the things studying in the instrument is what you mentioned about communication. So there's an assessment in there about sexual assertiveness. And what I expect to find, is that some types have a much easier time communicating sexuality and sexual needs than other types. So if you're working then couple and you have that information, you'll know, okay, if I have a type 2 or a type 9, matched with a type 7, the type 2 or type 9 might not be speaking up because they're not as sexually assertive. So I think this info could be really helpful. So I just super appreciate, people participating, because that'll help me to then share back with the whole Enneagram community that hopefully we can all find practically useful.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's a huge push that I have is I think there's a lot of places out there to get information on the Enneagram. And I really focus on how do we apply that? How do we apply that in our daily lives? I can learn about myself, I might be a purple, but if I don't really understand what that means, how it shows up in my life, how it, is different than being I'm trying not to use the actual popular colors, right? But the teal, how is that similar? How is it different? And what's the value of me having that information? So again, for me, the value is amazing in the therapy office of how I can use this information to start conversations with clients that are often otherwise very difficult or very time consuming to have, so it gives us a tool to prompt the conversation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, good. All right, Sam. Well, thank you again. And everybody, thank you for watching the video. I hope that you learned something today about Enneagram and sexuality. Again, feel free to reach out either to Sam or myself if you have any questions, and definitely get a hold of Sam to see if you can participate in her research. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and I will see you